Billionaire's son brings black woman home. Then he went pale when she extended her hand to greet him. He recognized the engraved bracelet on her wrist. The silver cuff caught the chandelier light as Valentina reached out, and Julian Moore's face drained of all color. 26 years of buried guilt hit him like a freight train as he stared at the Roman numerals etched in silver. 6.15 NXCI, June 15, 1991. The date he'd fallen in love with Scarlett Jackson, the woman he'd abandoned when she needed him most. "Where did you get that?" Julian whispered, his voice breaking. "It belonged to my mother," Valentina replied, watching the billionaire crumble before a piece of jewelry that had cost less than his tie. "Scarlett Jackson," he breathed, understanding that his past had finally come to collect. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, 3 weeks earlier on a cold December morning in Santa Monica. Noah Moore adjusted his navy blue tie for the third time, staring at his reflection in the marble foyer of his father's Beverly Hills mansion. At 25, he'd inherited Julian's sharp jawline and determined chin, but his warm brown eyes held a gentleness his father had lost somewhere along the way to his first billion. "You sure about this?" he whispered into his phone, pacing beneath the crystal chandelier that had cost more than most people's homes. On the other end, Valentina's voice carried that mix of confidence and vulnerability that had captivated him 6 months ago at the UCLA Law Library. "I'm sure about you, Noah. That's all that matters." He smiled despite his nerves. Meeting her had been like finding color in a black and white world. While other women saw dollar signs when they looked at him, Valentina saw him. The guy who preferred pizza over caviar, who'd rather spend Saturday mornings at animal shelters than yacht clubs. "My parents can be." He searched for the right word. "Intense." "I can handle intense," she said, and something in her tone made him believe she'd faced far worse than Beverly Hills judgment. 15 miles away in her modest Santa Monica apartment, Valentina Jackson stood before her bathroom mirror, fastening the engraved cuff bracelet around her wrist. Her fingers traced the Roman numerals, 6.15 MCMXCI, June 15, 1991. The date her mother had fallen in love with the man who would destroy her. "Today, Mama. Today he pays." Her reflection showed her mother's face. High cheekbones, skin like rich coffee, eyes that held storms. But where Scarlett Jackson had been soft and trusting, Valentina had built herself into something harder. Law school had sharpened her mind. Years of planning had steeled her heart. The bracelet felt warm against her skin, as if her mother's love still lived in the silver. Scarlett had worn it every day of her pregnancy, even as Julian's calls stopped coming. Even as she'd grown weak giving birth to twins she'd never get to raise. "Valentina, baby, you ready?" Her Aunt Kaani's voice carried through the thin walls. At 48, Kaani had raised Valentina after Scarlett's death, working 3 jobs to keep them afloat. She'd been the one to tell Valentina the truth about her father, Julian Moore, the billionaire who'd built his fortune on the foundation her mother had helped lay, then kicked away when it became inconvenient. "Almost," Valentina called back, slipping into the emerald green dress she'd chosen specifically for tonight. Not too expensive to seem calculating, not too cheap to appear unworthy of a Moore. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail. Her phone buzzed. Noah again. "Just pulled up. You look incredible, by the way." She glanced out her window to see him climbing from his modest Honda Accord, not the Ferrari his father had bought him, which sat unused in the garage. That thoughtfulness was what made this so hard. Noah was nothing like Julian. He was kind, genuine, devoted to his environmental law studies. In another life, she might have loved him for real. But this wasn't another life. This was the one where her mother died alone, clutching a hospital bracelet instead of the man who'd promised never to leave her. "What would you think of me now, Mama?" she wondered, touching the bracelet one last time. 20 minutes later, Noah's hand found hers as they walked up the curved driveway of the Moore estate. Christmas lights outlined every window, but the massive house felt cold despite its grandeur. This was old money trying to look tasteful, all cream stone and perfectly manicured hedges. "Remember," Noah said softly, "if they get weird, we leave." You don't have to prove anything to them. Oh, but I do, she thought. I have everything to prove. The front door opened before they could ring the bell. Christina Moore stood there in a wine-colored cocktail dress, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. At 52, she was still beautiful, but there was something brittle in her smile. Noah, darling. She kissed her son's cheek, her eyes already assessing Valentina. And you must be Valentina. How lovely to finally meet you. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Moore. Valentina's voice carried just the right amount of respect and warmth. Your home is beautiful. Please, call me Christina. The older woman's smile didn't reach her eyes, but she stepped aside to let them in. Julian's in his study. He'll be out shortly. As they entered the living room, Valentina catalogued every detail. The Persian rugs, the original artwork, the family photos that showed a life of privilege Noah had never asked for. But her eyes kept returning to one particular photo on the mantel. Julian with his arm around Christina on their wedding day, both of them young and seemingly happy. 6 months after Mama died, Valentina realized. Her jaw tightened. So tell me about yourself, Christina said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than Valentina's car. Noah says you're in law school? Yes, at UCLA. Civil rights law. Every word was true, even if her motivations weren't what they seemed. How admirable! And your family? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Valentina had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. My parents passed away when I was young. My aunt raised me. Noah's hand found hers, squeezing gently. He knew her parents were dead, but not how. Not why. Not that one of them had been destroyed by the man whose house they now sat in. Heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway, confident, purposeful strides that commanded attention even before their owner appeared. Julian Moore entered the room like a king surveying his domain. At 55, he was still handsome in that distinguished way that money could preserve. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored. But there was something hollow in his gray eyes, something that all his billions couldn't fill. Sorry to keep you waiting, he said, his voice carrying that subtle authority that came from never being told no. End-of-year business calls. Dad, this is Valentina, Noah said, rising to make introductions. Valentina, my father, Julian Moore. Valentina stood slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment 26 years in the making. She extended her hand, letting the bracelet catch the light from the chandelier above. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Moore. Julian's eyes dropped to her outstretched hand, and the color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. His confident smile faltered, then disappeared entirely as his gaze fixed on the engraved cuff bracelet around her wrist. 6.15. McSci. The date he'd fallen in love with Scarlett Jackson. The date he'd given her this very bracelet and promised her forever. The date that had haunted every success since, because he'd built his empire on the grave of the only woman who'd ever truly known him. Julian stammered, his hand frozen halfway to hers. The room seemed to tilt around him as 26 years of buried guilt came crashing back. That bracelet. Noah frowned. Dad, you okay? But Julian couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the silver band that carried his greatest shame. Because he knew exactly where he'd seen it before. He'd bought it. He'd engraved it. He'd fastened it around the wrist of the woman he'd loved more than life itself, and then abandoned when she needed him most. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Julian's hand trembled as he stared at the bracelet, his mind racing back 26 years to a cramped apartment in East Los Angeles where dreams felt possible and love seemed eternal. Julian. Christina's voice cut through his paralysis, sharp with concern and growing suspicion. What's wrong? Valentina kept her hand extended, watching every micro-expression cross Julian's face. She saw the exact moment recognition hit him, the way his pupils dilated, how his breath caught in his throat. This was better than she'd imagined. The great Julian Moore, reduced to a stuttering mess by a piece of silver jewelry. The bracelet, Julian whispered, his voice barely audible. Where did you get that bracelet? Noah looked between his father and girlfriend, confusion creasing his brow. Dad, what are you talking about? It's just jewelry. But it wasn't just jewelry. Valentina could see that Julian remembered everything. The tiny jewelry shop in downtown LA where he'd spent his last $100 on the custom engraving. The way Scarlett's eyes had filled with tears when she'd read the inscription. The promise he'd made that night, holding her close in their tiny bed, swearing he'd never leave her side. I asked you a question, Julian said, his voice gaining strength as the initial shock faded into something sharper. His businessman instincts were kicking in, the same calculating mind that had built a fortune from nothing. Where did you get that bracelet? Valentina let her hand drop slowly, the bracelet catching the light one more time. She'd practiced this moment in the mirror 1,000 times, but being here, seeing the genuine pain in his eyes, made her chest tighten unexpectedly. It belonged to my mother, she said simply. The words hit Julian like physical blows. His legs gave out slightly, and he gripped the back of the nearest chair for support. Christina was on her feet instantly, moving to his side with the fluid grace of a woman who'd spent decades managing her husband's public image. Julian, sit down. You look pale. Her voice carried an edge of command, the tone of someone used to taking control in crisis situations. But Julian couldn't sit, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at this young woman who looked so heartbreakingly familiar. Now that he was really looking, he could see Scarlett in every feature, the elegant curve of her neck, the way she held her shoulders, the stubborn tilt of her chin when challenged. Your mother, he repeated, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. What was her name? Valentina's dark eyes never wavered from his face. Scarlett Jackson. The name landed like a detonation in the quiet room. Julian's knees finally gave out completely, and he sank into the chair Christina had been trying to guide him toward. His face had gone from pale to ashen, and his hands shook as he ran them through his perfectly styled hair. Noah stepped forward, alarm clear in his voice. Who's Scarlett Jackson? Dad, what's going on? Christina's manicured fingers tightened on Julian's shoulder, her own face a mask of controlled panic. 26 years of marriage had taught her to read her husband's moods, and she'd never seen him like this. Julian, answer your son. But Julian was lost in memory, drowning in guilt that felt as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. Scarlett, with her infectious laugh and unwavering faith in him. Scarlett, who'd worked double shifts at the diner to help pay for his business classes. Scarlett, who'd held him when the first 3 startups failed, whispering that she believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. Scarlett, who'd called him crying at 2 in the morning to tell him she was pregnant, and he'd hung up the phone and disappeared for 3 days, too terrified and selfish to face what that meant. She's dead, isn't she? Julian's voice cracked on the words. It wasn't really a question. Deep down, he'd always known. Scarlett would never have let their child grow up without knowing who her father was unless she hadn't had a choice. Valentina's composure wavered for just a moment, a flash of raw grief crossing her features before she locked it down. She died a week after giving birth. Complications. The room seemed to shrink around them. Noah looked like he'd been slapped, his gaze darting between his father and Valentina as pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to solve began clicking into place. Wait, Noah said slowly, his voice tight with dawning horror. If your mother was pregnant, and she's dead, and you're here. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice what his mind was screaming. Valentina turned to look at him then, and the love she'd been trying to keep buried flickered in her eyes. This was the part she'd dreaded most. Watching Noah realize what she'd done to him. How she'd used him. I'm 26 years old, Noah. Born in December of 1991. The math was simple and devastating. Christina's sharp intake of breath filled the silence as she calculated the timeline. Her wedding had been in June of 1992. Julian had proposed to her just 4 months after Scarlett Jackson had died giving birth to his child. You son of a bitch, Christina whispered. But there was more shock than anger in her voice. Even after all these years of marriage, she was still discovering new depths to her husband's capacity for compartmentalization. Noah stumbled backward, his face a portrait of betrayal and disbelief. You're my sister? My half-sister. I am. Valentina's voice was steady, But Julian could see the pain she was trying to hide. "I've known for years. Since I was 15 and my aunt finally told me the truth about who my father really was." Julian finally found his voice, though it came out as a broken rasp. "Kaani. Your aunt is Kaani Jackson." Something shifted in Valentina's expression at the mention of her aunt's name, a flicker of surprise that she quickly suppressed. But Julian caught it, his businessman instincts still sharp even in crisis. "You remember her," Valentina said, and there was a new tension in her voice. Of course he remembered Kaani, Scarlett's younger sister, barely 18 when Julian had met her. She'd always watched him with an intensity that had made him uncomfortable, especially toward the end when things with Scarlett had gotten complicated. "She helped you find me," Julian said, the pieces falling into place. "She helped you plan this." Valentina's silence was answer enough. Noah was still reeling, his hands pressed against his temples like he could physically push away the reality crashing down on him. 6 months. We've been together for 6 months. I introduced you to my friends. I was falling in. He couldn't finish, couldn't say the word love now that it felt poisoned. "I never let it go too far," Valentina said quietly, and for the first time since entering the house, her voice carried genuine remorse. "I made sure we never crossed certain lines. I couldn't do that to you, Noah. Despite everything, I couldn't." Christina laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "How considerate. You've only emotionally devastated my son instead of physically violating him too." The words hit their mark, and Valentina flinched. But she straightened her shoulders and met Christina's glare head-on. "I never wanted to hurt Noah. He wasn't supposed to be part of this." "But he was convenient," Julian said, his voice gaining strength as shock gave way to understanding. "You needed a way to get close to me, to get inside my life, learn my weaknesses, my secrets." Valentina didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. Everything Julian was saying was true, even if it felt different now, standing in this room watching Noah's world crumble. "What do you want?" Julian asked, business instincts taking over even as his personal world imploded. "Money. A public acknowledgement. Revenge." The word revenge hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Valentina's dark eyes flashed, and suddenly the vulnerability was gone, replaced by something much harder. "I want you to remember what it felt like," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I want you to remember being 23 years old and terrified and alone. Because that's what you made my mother feel. That's what you made me feel every day for 26 years. Julian's face crumpled. "I was a coward. I was 24 years old, broke, and scared out of my mind. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I thought I was protecting her from a life of poverty." "You thought you were protecting yourself," Valentina shot back. "Don't you dare try to rewrite history now. You abandoned her because it was inconvenient, because your dreams mattered more than hers." The accusation hit home because it was true. Julian had told himself a dozen different stories over the years, but at the core, it had been about self-preservation, about choosing the easier path. "You're right," he said simply. "I chose myself over her. Over you. I've regretted it every day since." "Have you?" Valentina's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like abandoning us worked out pretty well for you. Billion-dollar empire, beautiful wife, successful son. Where exactly does regret fit into that picture?" Julian met her eyes then, and she saw something there that surprised her. Genuine anguish, deep and old and never quite healed. "Every success felt hollow because she wasn't there to share it," he said quietly. "Every milestone meant nothing because I knew it was built on the grave of the only woman who ever really believed in me." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Then Noah spoke, his voice hollow with betrayal. "Get out." Valentina turned to him, her careful composure finally cracking. "Noah, please. Get out of my house," he said again, stronger this time. "Both of you figure out whatever twisted family drama this is, but leave me out of it." As Valentina gathered her purse with trembling hands, she caught Julian's eye one more time. The real confrontation was just beginning. The front door slammed behind Valentina with the finality of a coffin lid. She stood on the marble steps of the Moore estate, the December night air biting through her emerald dress, trying to process what had just happened. 6 months of careful planning, and it had all unraveled in less than 10 minutes. Her phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Kaani. How did it go? Did you see his face when he recognized the bracelet? Valentina stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. How could she explain that seeing Julian's genuine anguish had shaken something loose inside her? That watching Noah's heartbreak had felt like tearing out her own? The front door opened behind her, and she tensed, expecting Noah. Instead, Julian emerged, his expensive suit jacket abandoned inside, his white dress shirt wrinkled from where he'd gripped it in his hands. "Don't," she said without turning around. "Don't come out here and try to make this about your guilt." Julian stopped 3 steps behind her, his breath visible in the cold air. "I'm not trying to make this about anything. I need to know about her. About Scarlett." The name sent a shiver through Valentina that had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd grown up with stories about her mother, but they'd all been filtered through Aunt Kaani's bitterness. Scarlett the victim. Scarlett the fool who trusted a man who didn't deserve her. "There's nothing for you to know," Valentina said, finally turning to face him. "She's been dead for 26 years. Your chance to know her died when you hung up that phone." Julian flinched as if she'd struck him. "I never hung up on her. Aunt Kaani told me everything. How Mama called you crying, telling you she was pregnant. How the line went dead and you disappeared for 3 days." "That's not how it happened." Julian's voice was quiet but firm. "I dropped the phone when she told me. I was in shock, and the call cut off. When I tried to call back, the number was disconnected." Valentina's certainty wavered for just a moment. "You're lying." "Why would I lie now? What's the point?" Julian ran his hands through his hair, destroying what was left of his perfect styling. "I drove to your mother's apartment the next day. She was gone. The landlord said she'd broken her lease and moved out. No forwarding address." The words hit Valentina like physical blows. This wasn't the story she'd grown up with. In Aunt Kaani's version, Julian had coldly abandoned Scarlett the moment pregnancy became inconvenient. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Aunt Kaani said you knew where Mama was. She said you chose not to come." Julian's expression shifted, something dark and understanding flickering in his eyes. "Kaani was there when you were born?" "Of course she was. She's the one who raised me after Mama died. And she's the one who helped you find me. Who helped you plan all this." There was something in his tone that made Valentina's stomach clench. She wanted justice for her sister. "Did she?" Julian took a step closer, and Valentina could see the sharp intelligence that had built his empire. Or did she want revenge for something else entirely? Before Valentina could ask what he meant, the front door burst open again. This time it was Christina, her perfect composure finally cracked, her blonde hair escaping its elegant updo. "Don't you dare," Christina snarled, pointing a manicured finger at Julian. "Don't you dare stand out here playing the victim with your bastard daughter." "Christina!" 26 years of marriage. Julian. 26 years. And I'm finding out on Christmas Eve that you have another child? That you got some girl pregnant and abandoned her. Julian's jaw tightened. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Christina's voice rose to just below a shout. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you knocked up your college girlfriend and ran like a coward when things got complicated." Valentina watched the exchange with growing unease. Something felt wrong about this whole confrontation. Christina's anger seemed performative, too calculated for genuine shock. "You knew," Valentina said suddenly, the realization hitting her like lightning. "You knew about my mother." Christina's tirade cut off abruptly. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and Valentina saw something calculating underneath. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Julian was staring at his wife now with dawning horror. "Oh God! You did know. You've always known." Christina's silence was damning. How long? Julian's voice was barely above a whisper. How long have you known I had a daughter? Christina straightened her shoulders, her composure returning like armor sliding into place. Since before we were married. The words hung in the frigid air like icicles waiting to fall. Julian staggered backward as if she'd physically struck him. I hired a private investigator to look into your background before I accepted your proposal, Christina continued, her voice clinically calm. Standard procedure for someone marrying into my family's money. The investigator found records of Scarlett Jackson's pregnancy and death. Valentina felt the ground shift beneath her feet. You've known about me my entire life? Christina's cold blue eyes fixed on her. I've known of your existence. I made sure you stayed far away from my family. What does that mean? Julian's voice was dangerous now, the businessman replaced by something primal and protective. Christina smiled, and it was the most chilling thing Valentina had ever seen. It means I made sure that little ghetto girl would never be a problem for us. A few well-placed obstacles here and there. A scholarship application that got lost. A job interview that never happened. College acceptance letters that somehow never made it to the right address. Valentina's world tilted. Every struggle, every roadblock, every time she'd wondered why things seemed harder for her than for other people with similar grades and achievements. You sabotaged my life, she breathed. I protected my family, Christina corrected. I wasn't about to let some dead girl's bastard child show up demanding her piece of the more fortune. Julian looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. You monster. She was just a child. She was a threat. Christina's mask was completely gone now, revealing the calculating predator underneath. And threats need to be neutralized. Valentina's hands were shaking, not from cold but from rage so pure it felt like fire in her veins. 26 years of struggle, of wondering why she had to fight twice as hard for half as much. 26 years of believing her father had simply abandoned her, when the truth was so much worse. You don't understand, Valentina said, her voice low and deadly calm. I didn't come here for money. I don't want a piece of your precious more fortune. Christina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Of course you do. Why else would you go through all this elaborate? I came here to destroy it. The words cut through Christina's laughter like a blade. Both Julian and Christina stared at Valentina, finally understanding that they were dealing with something far more dangerous than a young woman seeking acknowledgement or financial support. For 6 months, I've been inside your life, Valentina continued, her composure returning now that her true purpose was in the open. I know every business deal, every investment, every weakness in your empire. I know about the Cayman accounts, the tax shelters, the bribes disguised as consulting fees. Julian's face went pale. Valentina, don't. I know about the environmental violations at the Myanmar factories. The safety reports that were buried. The workers who died because fixing the ventilation system would have cut into quarterly profits. Christina took a step backward, finally understanding the magnitude of what they were facing. I know about the pension funds you've been borrowing from illegally, Valentina pressed on relentlessly. The retirement money you've been using as your personal piggy bank while telling thousands of employees their futures are secure. How could you possibly know about that? Julian whispered. Valentina smiled, and it was razor-sharp. Noah talks in his sleep. Amazing what pillow talk can accomplish when someone trusts you completely. The betrayal of using Noah's unconscious confessions hit Julian like a physical blow. This young woman, his daughter, had systematically dismantled his life using his own son as an unwitting weapon. What do you want? Christina asked, her voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. I want you to feel what my mother felt, Valentina said simply. Helpless. Abandoned. Watching everything you thought was secure crumble away. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over a pre-drafted email. One button, and everything I know goes to the SEC, the IRS, the Environmental Protection Agency, and every major news outlet in the country. The Moore empire doesn't just collapse, it becomes a cautionary tale. Julian stared at his daughter, seeing Scarlett's stubborn determination in every line of her face. But where Scarlett's strength had been gentle, Valentina's was forged in abandonment and rage. "You'd destroy innocent people too," he said desperately. "Thousands of employees who depend on more industries for their livelihoods. Pension holders who have nothing to do with my mistakes." For just a moment, Valentina's resolve flickered. She hadn't considered the collateral damage, too focused on her target to see the innocent bystanders who would be caught in the blast radius. "That's not my problem," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Julian stepped closer, and she could see tears in his eyes. "You're my daughter. You have your mother's heart, even if you've tried to bury it. Scarlett would never have wanted this." Valentina's finger trembled over the send button. "Don't you dare tell me what my mother would have wanted. You didn't know her. You proved that when you left." As the three of them stood locked in a triangle of betrayal and recrimination, none of them noticed the figure watching from the upstairs window, or the phone recording every word of their confrontation. The first drops of rain began to fall as Valentina stood frozen on the driveway, her finger still hovering over the send button. The December storm that had been threatening all evening was finally arriving, and with it came a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep into her very soul. "Valentina, please." Julian's voice cracked with desperation. "If you do this, there's no going back. Once you send that email, everything changes. Not just for me, but for thousands of innocent people." She wanted to press send. Every fiber of her being, every year of carefully nursed rage, screamed at her to end this. To watch Julian Moore's empire crumble the way her mother's dreams had crumbled 26 years ago. But something held her back. Maybe it was the image of Noah's devastated face, or the way Julian's tears looked genuine in the porch light. Maybe it was her mother's voice, carried on the wind like a ghost's whisper, reminding her that revenge and justice weren't always the same thing. The rain intensified suddenly, transforming from drops to sheets of water that soaked through her dress in seconds. Christina shrieked and bolted for the front door, her perfectly styled hair already dripping down her face. "Get inside," she called over the storm. "All of you, get inside before you catch pneumonia." It was a surreal moment. The woman who had just admitted to sabotaging Valentina's entire life was now concerned about her catching cold. But the rain was coming down so hard that visibility dropped to mere feet, and Valentina's thin dress offered no protection against the December storm. Julian grabbed her elbow gently, his touch surprisingly warm. "She's right. Whatever happens next, we shouldn't be standing in a hurricane." Valentina allowed herself to be guided back toward the house, her mind reeling from everything that had been revealed. As they stepped through the front door, she caught sight of herself in the hall mirror. Makeup smeared, hair plastered to her head, the elegant woman she'd carefully crafted for tonight's confrontation replaced by something much more vulnerable. Christina disappeared upstairs muttering about dry clothes and ruined shoes, leaving Julian and Valentina alone in the marble foyer. The silence stretched between them, filled with 26 years of missed conversations and unspoken words. "There are guest bathrooms upstairs," Julian said finally. "I can find you something dry to wear." Valentina almost refused out of pure stubbornness, but she was shivering so violently that her teeth were chattering. "Fine. But this doesn't change anything." As they climbed the curved staircase, Valentina couldn't help but notice the family photos lining the walls. Noah at various ages, gap-toothed at 6, awkward at 13, confident at his high school graduation. A life documented in expensive frames, every milestone carefully preserved. She'd grown up with 3 photos of her mother, all faded and kept in a shoebox under Aunt Kaani's bed. The contrast was stark and painful. Julian led her to a guest suite at the end of the hall, switching on lights to reveal a room larger than the entire apartment Valentina had shared with her aunt growing up. Everything was cream and gold, expensive and beautiful and utterly soulless. "I'll find you some clothes," Julian said, then paused in the doorway. "Valentina, when you were growing up, were you happy? Despite everything, did Kaani take good care of you?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected more attempts at manipulation or self-justification, not genuine concern for her childhood. "She did her best," Valentina said carefully. "She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. Made sure I stayed in school, kept me out of trouble." Julian nodded, something like relief flickering across his features. Good. That's good. He left her alone then, and Valentina sank onto the edge of the enormous bed. The rain pounded against the windows with increasing ferocity, and she realized with growing unease that she wasn't going anywhere tonight. The storm had effectively trapped them all in this house together, forced into proximity whether they wanted it or not. She pulled out her phone, intending to call for a ride anyway, but the screen showed no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. Her finger found the draft email again, but without signal, even her nuclear option was temporarily useless. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Julian's voice came through the door. I left some clothes outside. They're Christina's, but they should fit. Valentina waited until she heard his footsteps retreat before cracking the door open. A stack of clothes waited on the hallway carpet, expensive designer pieces in her exact size. Either Julian had an excellent eye, or Christina had been more thorough in her surveillance than she'd admitted. The thought sent another chill through Valentina that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. 20 minutes later, dressed in Christina's cashmere sweater and designer jeans, Valentina made her way back downstairs. The house felt different in the storm, smaller somehow, despite its massive size. The rain created an intimate cocoon, shutting out the rest of the world. She found Julian in what appeared to be a study, sitting behind a massive desk with a tumbler of amber liquid in his hands. He'd changed into jeans and a simple white t-shirt, and without the armor of his expensive suits, he looked younger, more vulnerable. Scotch, he offered, gesturing to a crystal decanter. I don't drink. Valentina settled into the leather chair across from his desk, hyper-aware of every detail of the room. This was clearly Julian's private space, the walls lined with books that looked actually read, awards and photos from his early business days mixed with more recent achievements. Smart, Julian said, taking a sip. Alcohol never solved anything, but it makes the problems feel temporarily manageable. Valentina's eyes wandered over the photographs, pausing on one that made her breath catch. A young Julian, maybe 22, standing with his arm around a beautiful black woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile. Scarlett. You kept it, she whispered. Julian followed her gaze and his face softened. I kept everything from that time. Every photo, every letter she wrote, every ticket stub from movies we saw together. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. I know I have no right to these memories, but I couldn't throw them away. Despite herself, Valentina leaned forward as Julian opened the box. Inside were dozens of small mementos, ticket stubs, as he'd said, but also pressed flowers, handwritten notes, and at the very bottom, a hospital bracelet dated December 15, 1991. How did you get that? Valentina's voice was barely above a whisper. Kaani gave it to me at Scarlett's funeral. The words hit Valentina like a physical blow. You were at Mama's funeral? Julian's hands trembled as he lifted the hospital bracelet, holding it as if it were made of spun glass. I was there. In the back, where no one could see me. I had no right to grieve publicly, but I couldn't stay away. Valentina felt her carefully constructed narrative beginning to crumble. Aunt Kaani had told her that Julian never came, that he was too busy building his empire to care that the mother of his child was dead. Kaani saw you there? She did more than see me. She came over after the service, after everyone else had left. She handed me this bracelet and told me that Scarlett had worn it every day, that she'd asked for me at the end. Tears were streaming down Valentina's face now, 26 years of grief finally finding release. What else did she say? Julian was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing the faded writing on the hospital bracelet. She said that Scarlett forgave me, that she understood I was young and scared, and she didn't blame me for running. The words shattered something inside Valentina's chest. All these years, she'd carried her mother's pain like a weapon, convinced that Scarlett had died hating the man who'd abandoned her. But if what Julian was saying was true, she also said something else, Julian continued, his voice heavy with old pain. She said that if I ever tried to find you, if I ever tried to be part of your life, she'd make sure you knew exactly what kind of man your father really was. She'd make sure you hated me. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture that Valentina didn't want to see. Aunt Kaylani's bitterness whenever Julian's name came up. The way she'd encouraged Valentina's anger, fed it over the years until it became an all-consuming fire. She loved him too, Valentina said suddenly, the realization hitting her like lightning. Aunt Kaylani loved you. Julian's silence was confirmation enough. That's why she helped me plan this. It wasn't about justice for Mama. It was about revenge for herself. Before Julian could respond, the lights flickered and went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the room in an eerie blue glow. Through the windows, they could see trees bending dangerously in the wind, branches snapping like gunshots. The power grid must be down, Julian said, moving to look out the window. This storm is worse than they predicted. As if summoned by his words, Christina appeared in the doorway wearing a silk robe and an expression of barely controlled panic. The phones are dead, the internet is down, and there's a tree blocking the driveway. We're completely cut off. She looked between Julian and Valentina with growing suspicion. What have you two been talking about? Valentina stood slowly, her mind racing with new understanding. She'd come here tonight believing she knew the truth about her past, about her mother's relationship with Julian, about the reasons for her own struggles. But every assumption was being challenged, every certainty stripped away. We've been talking about lies, Valentina said, her voice steady despite the storm raging both outside and in her heart. About the stories people tell to justify their choices. About the difference between truth and revenge. Christina's face paled in the blue emergency lighting. What does that mean? Valentina pulled out her phone, staring at the draft email that would destroy the Moore family empire. Her finger hovered over the send button, but for the first time since she'd composed it, she wasn't sure she wanted to press it. It means, she said slowly, that maybe I need to have a conversation with my aunt before I decide what justice really looks like. Thunder crashed overhead, and in its echo, all three of them understood that this night was far from over. The emergency lighting cast long shadows across Julian's study as the three of them sat in tense silence. Outside, the storm raged with biblical fury, tree branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. But inside, a different kind of tempest was brewing. Valentina stared at her phone screen, the draft email still waiting to be sent, but her finger had moved away from the button. The hospital bracelet in Julian's hands had shaken loose 26 years of carefully constructed hatred, and she needed answers before she could move forward. I need to call Aunt Kaylani, she said finally. Christina laughed bitterly from her position by the window. Good luck with that. The storm knocked out the cell towers 20 minutes ago. But Julian was already moving, pulling an old landline phone from a drawer in his desk. This line is underground. It might still work. The dial tone was weak but present. Valentina's hands trembled as she dialed her aunt's number, the digits burned into her memory from childhood. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Kaylani's familiar voice answered. Hello. It's me, Valentina said simply. There was a pause. Then Kaylani's voice sharpened with excitement. Valentina! How did it go? Please tell me you saw the look on his face when he recognized the bracelet. Julian flinched at the eagerness in Kaylani's tone. Christina moved closer, her face a mask of concentration as she tried to hear the other side of the conversation. I saw it, Valentina said carefully. Aunt Kay, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course, baby. You know I've never lied to you. The words hit Valentina like a slap. She put the phone on speaker so Julian could hear, ignoring his sharp look of surprise. Were you at Mama's funeral? Valentina asked. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that they could hear the storm through the phone line from Kaylani's apartment. Why would you ask me that? Kaylani's voice had changed, become guarded. Because Julian was there. He told me you gave him Mama's hospital bracelet. Another pause, longer this time. When Kaylani spoke again, her voice was tight with an emotion Valentina couldn't identify. He told you that? Is it true? Valentina, honey, you need to remember that Julian Moore is a liar and a manipulator. He's probably telling you all sorts of things to make himself look better. But Valentina was watching Julian's face, seeing the genuine pain there as he listened to Kaani's deflection. This wasn't the face of a man crafting lies to save himself. This was the face of someone reliving old wounds. He has the bracelet, Aunt Kay. Mama's hospital bracelet. How would he have it if you didn't give it to him? The silence stretched so long that Valentina thought the line had gone dead. Then Kaani's voice came back, smaller now, defeated. Yes. I was at the funeral. Yes, I gave him the bracelet. Why did you lie to me about that? Because I was protecting you. Kaani's voice rose, anger replacing defeat. I was protecting you from a man who didn't deserve to grieve for your mother. A man who abandoned her when she needed him most. Julian leaned forward, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the speaker. Hello, Kaani. The sharp intake of breath on the other end was audible. Julian. Tell her the truth, Julian said simply. Tell Valentina what really happened the night Scarlett called me about the pregnancy. I don't know what you're talking about. You were there, Kaani. You answered the phone when I called back. Christina's eyes widened, and she moved closer to the desk. This was clearly news to her as well. That's not how it happened, Kaani said, but her voice lacked conviction. You told me that Scarlett never wanted to see me again, Julian continued relentlessly. You said she was better off without me, that I should stay away if I cared about her at all. Valentina felt the room spinning around her. Aunt Kay, is that true? The silence was damning. You have to understand, Kaani said finally, her voice breaking. Scarlett was my baby sister. She was only 22, and she was so scared. She didn't need some boy who would run at the first sign of trouble. But he didn't run, Valentina said, the pieces finally falling into place. He tried to come back, and you stopped him. I protected her. From what? Julian's voice was sharp now, 26 years of buried anger finally surfacing. From someone who loved her. From the father of her child. From heartbreak. Kaani shouted through the phone. From being abandoned again when things got hard. You think you would have stayed? You think you would have been there through the poverty, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices? We'll never know, will we? Julian's voice was quiet again, but it carried the weight of a lifetime's regret. Because you made that choice for all of us. Valentina sank back into her chair, her worldview crumbling around her. Every story she'd been told, every justification for her hatred, had been built on Kaani's lies. There's more, isn't there? Valentina said, dreading the answer. Tell me about the night Mama died. Kaani's sob was audible through the phone. Valentina, please don't do this. Tell me. She asked for him, Kaani whispered. At the end, when the complications started, she kept asking for Julian. She wanted to see him one more time. Julian's face crumpled, and he gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles went white. Did you call him? Valentina asked, though she already knew the answer. I couldn't. By the time I realized how serious it was, how sick she really was, it was too late. She died an hour after you were born. The room was silent except for the storm and the sound of Julian's quiet crying. 26 years of believing her mother had died alone, abandoned, and it had been Kaani's choice all along. You loved him, Valentina said suddenly, the final piece clicking into place. You loved Julian yourself. Kaani's sharp intake of breath was confirmation enough. That's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not justice for Mama. Revenge because she got the man you wanted. That's not true, Kaani said, but even through the phone, her denial sounded hollow. Christina stepped forward then, her voice cold and precise. Oh, but it is true. I had you investigated too, Kaani Jackson. Did you think I wouldn't look into the woman raising Julian's bastard child? Valentina looked up sharply. What did you find? Christina's smile was razor-sharp. That dear Aunt Kaani had quite the obsession with Julian Moore. She kept newspaper clippings about his business success, photos from his wedding, articles about his son's achievements. She's been watching this family for 26 years. You're lying, Kaylani's voice came through the phone, shrill with panic. Am I? Shall I tell Valentina about the letters you wrote to Julian? The ones you never sent, declaring your love and begging him to leave his wife for you. Julian stared at Christina in horror. You've been spying on Kaylani for years? I've been protecting my family, Christina said coldly. Something neither of you seems capable of doing. Valentina felt sick. The woman who had raised her, who had sacrificed so much to give her a better life, had been using her as a weapon in a twisted love triangle that had started before Valentina was even born. Aunt Kay, Valentina said into the phone, her voice hollow. Tell me you didn't help me plan this revenge just to hurt Julian because you couldn't have him. The silence that followed was answer enough. Valentina, baby, you have to understand. No. Valentina's voice was sharp, final. I don't have to understand anything. You lied to me my entire life. You made me hate a man who tried to come back for my mother. You used my grief as a weapon for your own twisted obsession. Everything I did was to protect you. You destroyed me, Valentina shouted, her careful composure finally cracking completely. You made me into someone who could use an innocent man's love as a weapon. You turned me into someone who could plan to destroy thousands of lives for something that wasn't even true. Through the phone, they could hear Kaylani crying. But Valentina felt no sympathy, only a hollow exhaustion that went bone deep. There's something else, Julian said quietly. Something Christina's investigators might not have found. Both women looked at him expectantly. The night Scarlett died, I tried calling the hospital. When they told me visiting hours were over, I drove there anyway. I sat in the parking garage for 3 hours, trying to work up the courage to go inside. He looked directly at Valentina, his gray eyes full of ancient pain. I was walking toward the entrance when I saw Kaylani coming out. She was carrying 2 babies. Twins. Valentina's breath caught. Valentine. Your brother lived? Julian's voice was barely a whisper. For 6 hours, Valentina said, tears streaming down her face. He was born first, but his lungs weren't developed. Aunt Kay told me he died right after birth. Julian's face went white. She was carrying 2 babies out of that hospital, Valentina. Not 1 body and 1 living child. 2 living babies. The implications hit Valentina like a physical blow. If Valentine had lived for 6 hours, if Kaylani had been carrying both children when she left the hospital, where did she take him? Valentina whispered. But even as she asked the question, she knew they wouldn't get an answer. The phone line had gone dead. Whether from the storm or from Kaylani hanging up, they would never know. The dead phone line buzzed with static before going completely silent. Valentina stared at the receiver in her hand, her mind reeling from the possibility that her twin brother might still be alive somewhere. The brother she'd mourned her entire life, the other half of herself that Aunt Kaylani had told her died within hours of birth. She wouldn't have, Valentina whispered, but even as she said it, doubt crept into her voice. After everything else Kaylani had lied about, what was one more deception? Julian was already moving, pulling files from a locked drawer in his desk. His hands shook as he spread papers across the mahogany surface, years of private investigation reports that Christina had commissioned but never shared with him. Christina, where are these reports about Kaylani? His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. If you've been watching her for years, you must have records of her life, her finances, her connections. Christina hesitated, her usual composure cracking under the weight of everything that had been revealed. Julian, maybe we should. Where are they? Julian's voice cut through her protest like a blade. Christina moved to a hidden safe behind one of the bookshelves, her fingers trembling as she entered the combination. She pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it on the desk between Julian and Valentina. I never wanted you to see these, Christina said quietly. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Valentina reached for the folder with shaking hands. The first page was a summary report dated just 3 months after her birth. As she read, her world tilted further off its axis. Kaylani Jackson relocated to Portland, Oregon in March 1992, she read aloud. Cited reason: Job opportunity in childcare services. Established residence at 847 Pine Street with dependent child, children. Her voice caught on the word. 2 children registered for medical care under the names Valentina Jackson and Vincent Jackson. The room went dead silent except for the storm still raging outside. Vincent. Not Valentine, as Kaani had told her, but Vincent. Her twin brother had not only survived, he'd been given a different name and apparently raised separately. Julian sank into his chair, his face ashen. She kept him. She kept my son and told you he was dead. But why? Valentina's voice was barely above a whisper. Why separate us? Why lie about him being dead? Christina leaned over the desk, pointing to another entry in the file. Because she couldn't handle raising twins alone. Look at the next entry. Valentina's eyes followed Christina's manicured finger to a report dated 6 months later. Vincent Jackson placed in foster care system due to caregiver being unable to manage multiple dependents. Child showed signs of developmental delays and required specialized medical attention that caregiver could not provide. The words hit Valentina like physical blows. While she'd been raised with love and attention, her twin brother had been abandoned to the foster system because he was too much trouble. She chose you, Julian said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. She couldn't handle both children, so she chose to keep the healthy one and let the system take care of the one who needed more help. Valentina flipped through more pages, her heart breaking with each new revelation. Vincent had been shuffled through 7 different foster homes in 5 years. He'd been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and required special education services. There were reports of behavioral issues, difficulty bonding with foster families, and a pattern of placements that never lasted more than 18 months. Where is he now? Valentina asked, her voice thick with tears she'd been holding back all night. Christina pointed to the most recent report, dated just 6 months ago. Sunrise Community Home in Salem, Oregon. It's a residential facility for adults with developmental disabilities. The address was listed, along with a note that Vincent Jackson, now 26 years old, had been a resident there for 3 years. The report mentioned that he was high-functioning but struggled with social interactions and had never had visitors aside from state-mandated welfare checks. Valentina stared at her brother's information through blurring tears. While she'd been planning elaborate revenge schemes and earning her law degree, her twin brother had been living in a group home, probably not even knowing he had a sister who thought he was dead. I have to see him, she said suddenly, standing up so quickly that her chair fell backward. I have to go to Oregon and find him. Valentina, wait, Julian said, rising as well. It's Christmas morning, and there's a storm. Nothing will be open, and the roads. I don't care. Her voice broke completely now, 26 years of suppressed grief and newfound hope colliding in her chest. I've already lost 26 years with him. I'm not losing another day. Julian moved around the desk and, without thinking, pulled his daughter into his arms. She stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against his chest, sobbing with a kind of raw pain that comes from having your entire world reconstructed in a single night. We'll find him, Julian whispered into her hair, and for the first time since she'd walked into his house, Valentina believed him. As soon as the storm passes, we'll drive to Oregon together. I want to meet my son too. Christina watched this reunion with an expression that was difficult to read. After a moment, she cleared her throat. The storm is supposed to clear by noon. If we leave then, we could be in Salem by evening. Both Julian and Valentina looked at her in surprise. We? Julian asked. Christina straightened her shoulders, her mask of composure sliding back into place. He's Noah's half-brother too. This affects all of us. As if summoned by the mention of his name, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Noah appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled from sleep, wearing sweatpants and a UCLA t-shirt. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked like he'd aged years in the past few hours. I heard voices, he said quietly, his gaze moving between his father and Valentina. I couldn't sleep. Valentina pulled away from Julian's embrace, suddenly self-conscious. Noah, I know you're my half-sister, he said, cutting her off. I've been sitting upstairs trying to process it all night. He ran his hands through his dark hair, so similar to Julian's. What I can't figure out is whether any of what we had was real. The question hung in the air like smoke. Valentina felt the weight of her deception settling on her shoulders, heavier than any burden she'd ever carried. The feelings were real, she said finally. I never expected that. I came here to use you, to hurt your father through you. But somewhere along the way, caring about you stopped being part of the plan. Noah's laugh was bitter. Somewhere along the way. That's supposed to make me feel better. No, Valentina said honestly. Nothing I say is going to make this better. I used your trust, your kindness, your love as weapons. I don't expect forgiveness. Julian stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Noah, there's something else you need to know. Something about your family that none of us knew until tonight. Over the next 20 minutes, Julian and Christina explained about Vincent, about the lies they'd all been living with, about the twin brother Noah had never known existed. They showed him the investigation files, the foster care records, the address of the group home where his half-brother now lived. Noah sank into one of the leather chairs, his face pale with shock. A brother. I have another brother. Half-brother, Christina corrected automatically, then caught herself. I'm sorry. That doesn't matter, does it? No, Noah said quietly. It doesn't matter. He looked up at Valentina, and she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't dared hope for. Understanding, maybe even the beginning of forgiveness. We're all half-siblings, aren't we? All products of Dad's complicated past. For the first time since entering the Moore house, Valentina smiled genuinely. I guess we are. The storm outside seemed to be weakening, the howling wind settling into a steady rhythm. Julian moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains to reveal the first hints of gray dawn creeping across the sky. The weather service says the storm should pass by noon, he said. If we leave then, we can be in Salem by dinner time. All of us? Noah asked, looking between his parents and Valentina. All of us, Julian confirmed. Vincent is family. It's time he knew that. Christina moved to the desk and began organizing the scattered files. I'll call ahead to the facility, explain the situation. They'll need time to prepare Vincent for visitors, especially if he's never had family contact before. As dawn broke over Beverly Hills, the four of them found themselves in the strange position of being united by shared secrets and newly discovered bonds. The revenge plot that had brought Valentina to their door had transformed into something none of them had expected. A chance at redemption, at healing wounds that had festered for 26 years. Valentina pulled out her phone and deleted the draft email that would have destroyed Julian's empire. The revenge she'd planned seemed hollow now compared to the possibility of reuniting with the brother she'd thought was lost forever. There's something I need to tell you all, she said, looking at each face in turn. Before we go to Oregon, before we try to be a family, you need to know what I was really planning to do tonight. She told them about the evidence she'd gathered, the illegal activities she'd documented, the nuclear option she'd been prepared to deploy. Julian's face grew paler with each revelation, but he didn't interrupt or try to justify his actions. So you see, Valentina concluded, I didn't come here for money or acknowledgement. I came here to destroy everything you'd built. And now, Julian prompted gently. Now I just want to find my brother and figure out what it means to be part of a family. Outside, the first rays of Christmas morning sun broke through the storm clouds, painting the sky in shades of hope. Sometimes the family you never knew you had is exactly what you needed all along. The Mercedes SUV cut through the post-storm landscape like a silver blade, carrying four people who were still learning how to be a family. Julian drove with the focused intensity he brought to everything, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Christina sat beside him, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in hushed tones to the administrators at Sunrise Community Home. In the back seat, Valentina stared out the window at the rolling hills of Northern California, her stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Beside her, Noah maintained the careful distance he'd established since learning the truth about their relationship. They weren't quite siblings, weren't quite strangers, but something uncomfortable in between. Yes, I understand the protocol, Christina was saying into her phone. But this is an extraordinary circumstance. Vincent Jackson has never known he had a family. We're trying to reunite him with his twin sister." Valentina's heart clenched at the words, twin sister. For 26 years, she'd felt like half a person, never understanding why she sometimes caught herself looking for someone who wasn't there, or why she felt most comfortable in groups of two. "What are they saying?" Julian asked, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror to catch Christina's expression. "They're concerned about Vincent's emotional stability," Christina replied, ending the call. "Apparently, he's had abandonment issues his whole life. Multiple failed placements. Difficulty trusting new people. The staff psychiatrist is worried that a sudden family reunion could trigger a psychological breakdown." Noah leaned forward from the back seat. "Maybe we should have called first. Given him time to process." "Time to process what?" Valentina's voice carried an edge of frustration. "That he's not alone in the world? That he has people who want to know him. Time to process that everyone he thought he could trust lied to him," Noah said quietly. "Just like they lied to you." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and uncomfortable. Valentina turned to face Noah fully for the first time since they'd left Beverly Hills. "Is that what this is about? You're angry that I lied to you, so you think Vincent will be angry too." "Aren't you angry?" Noah shot back. "Your aunt raised you believing your father was a monster and your brother was dead. If I were you, I'd be furious. I am furious." Valentina's composure finally cracked completely. "I'm furious that I wasted 26 years hating someone who tried to come back for my mother. I'm furious that my brother grew up alone in foster care while I was safe with Aunt Kaani. I'm furious that I turned myself into someone who could manipulate the kindest person I've ever met just to get revenge for something that wasn't even true." Her voice broke on the last words, and she turned back to the window, tears streaming down her face. Noah was quiet for a moment, then reached out tentatively to touch her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You're right. We're all dealing with lies and betrayal. I shouldn't have taken it out on you." But before Valentina could respond, Julian's phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Kaani's name appeared on the dashboard display, and the car fell silent except for the ringtone. "Don't answer it," Christina said sharply. But Julian was already reaching for the accept button. "We need to hear what she has to say." Kaani's voice filled the car, shrill with panic. "Julian, thank God. Where is Valentina? Is she with you?" "She's here," Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. "Valentina, baby, you need to come home right now. There are people looking for you. Dangerous people." Valentina leaned forward toward the dashboard speaker. "What people? What are you talking about?" "I can't explain over the phone. Just come home. Come home and we'll talk about everything. I'll tell you the truth about Vincent, about everything, but you need to get away from the Moore family right now." Christina and Julian exchanged sharp looks. Something in Kaani's voice was wrong, too urgent, too desperate. "What aren't you telling us, Aunt Kay?" Valentina asked, ice forming in her stomach. The pause stretched too long. When Kaani spoke again, her voice was different. Harder. "Nathan Kent came to see me this morning." Julian's foot hit the brake so hard that the SUV lurched, earning angry honks from the cars behind them. "What did you say?" "Nathan Kent. Your lawyer. He knows about Valentina's plan to expose your business dealings. He knows about the evidence she gathered." Christina went pale. How could he possibly know that? But Julian was already putting the pieces together, his businessman's mind working through the implications at lightning speed. "Because you told him. You've been working with Nathan all along." "Julian, I can explain. You've been feeding information to my own lawyer so he could destroy me." Julian's voice was deadly quiet. "The same lawyer who's been having an affair with my wife." The accusation hit the car like a bomb. Christina whirled to face Julian, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked almost like relief. "How did you know about Nathan and me?" she whispered. Noah made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Mom, you're having an affair." "It's not what you think," Christina said desperately, but the damage was already done. Valentina stared at the woman who had sabotaged her entire life, now discovering that her own marriage was built on lies. "How long?" she asked. 2 years, Christina admitted, her voice barely audible. "Nathan and I, we fell in love. But Julian, I swear I never told him about Valentina's plan. I didn't even know about it until last night." "But I did," Kaani's voice came through the speakers, and now she sounded triumphant. "I told Nathan everything. About Valentina's evidence, about her plan to destroy Julian. We've been working together for months." Julian pulled the car over to the shoulder of the highway, his hands shaking too badly to drive safely. "Why, Kaani? Why help Nathan destroy me?" "Because he promised me something Julian wouldn't give me," Kaani said, her mask finally slipping completely. "He promised me you. Once your marriage was destroyed, once your business was in ruins, once you had nothing left, you'd finally come to me." The car fell silent except for the sound of traffic rushing past them. Valentina felt sick, understanding finally dawning. Her aunt hadn't just used her for revenge. She'd been part of an elaborate conspiracy involving Julian's own lawyer and wife to systematically destroy his life. "Vincent," Valentina whispered suddenly. "Where is Vincent, really?" The silence on the other end of the phone stretched too long. "Aunt Kay, where is my brother?" When Kaani finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Nathan has him." The words hit like ice water. Julian's face went white, Christina gasped, and Noah grabbed Valentina's hand instinctively. "What do you mean Nathan has him?" Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. "Nathan found him at the group home 6 months ago. He's been taking care of him. Vincent doesn't know who Nathan really is, but he trusts him. Nathan visits him every week, brings him gifts, takes him out for day trips." Valentina's blood ran cold. "You let a stranger manipulate my autistic brother for 6 months as part of your revenge scheme?" "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Kaani said, her voice breaking. "Nathan was just supposed to gather information, build a relationship in case we needed leverage. But then when you got close to the Moore family, when you started actually caring about them, we knew we needed insurance." "Insurance?" Valentina repeated, her voice flat with horror. "You're using my brother as insurance." "Valentina, you need to understand. Nathan isn't going to hurt Vincent. He genuinely cares about him. But if Julian tries to fight back, if he tries to use his money and power to destroy Nathan's law practice." She didn't need to finish. The threat was clear. Julian was already turning the car around, his jaw set with determination. "We're going to Salem. Right now." "Julian, no." Kaani's voice was panicked now. "Nathan said if you come to Oregon, if you try to take Vincent, he'll disappear with him. Vincent trusts him now. He'll go anywhere Nathan asks him to go." "Then what do you want?" Christina asked, her voice hollow. "Julian drops all charges against Nathan. He accepts the divorce quietly and gives me half of everything in the settlement. And Valentina destroys all the evidence she has about the business irregularities." "And if we don't?" Noah asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then Vincent disappears forever," Kaani said simply. "And you'll spend the rest of your lives knowing you chose money and pride over family." Valentina stared at the phone display showing her aunt's name, the woman who had raised her, who had sacrificed for her, who had twisted that love into something monstrous. "You used him," she whispered. "You used an innocent, vulnerable man as a weapon." "I used what I had to," Kaani said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices to protect the people you love." "You don't love me," Valentina said, her voice growing stronger. "You love the idea of me, the weapon I could be against Julian, just like you loved the idea of him but never the reality." She reached forward and ended the call, then turned to face the 3 people who were quickly becoming the only family she had left. "We're going to get Vincent," she said simply. "Whatever it costs, whoever we have to fight, we're bringing him home." Julian nodded grimly and pressed harder on the accelerator. Behind them, the California sun was setting, painting the sky the color of fire and blood. None of them noticed the black sedan that had been following them since Beverly Hills, or the figure in the passenger seat speaking quietly into a cell phone. When the people you trust most become your greatest enemies, who can you turn to? The Sunrise Community Home sat on a quiet residential street, its cheerful yellow exterior and well-maintained gardens doing little to calm the tension that filled the Mercedes as Julian parked across from the building. Through the large windows, they could see residents moving about in what appeared to be a common area, some watching television, others engaged in quiet activities. There, Christina pointed to a figure visible through one of the ground floor windows. Is that him? Valentina's breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, even after 26 years, she recognized the profile. Vincent was taller than her, his dark hair shorter, but the way he held his head, the shape of his shoulders, the unconscious gestures as he worked on what appeared to be a puzzle, it was like looking at a masculine mirror of herself. "That's my brother," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Noah reached over and squeezed her hand. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the deception and manipulation, he understood the magnitude of this moment. "The black sedan," Julian said quietly, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "It's been following us since we left the highway." They all turned to look. A sleek black car sat 3 spaces behind them, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. As they watched, the driver's side door opened, and Nathan Kent emerged. At 52, Nathan was still handsome in that polished way that expensive suits and regular gym sessions could maintain. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His charcoal overcoat probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But there was something predatory in the way he moved, scanning the street before walking toward the facility's entrance. "He's going inside," Noah said, tension evident in his voice. "To do what?" Christina asked, though they all feared they knew the answer. Julian was already reaching for his door handle when his phone rang. Nathan's name appeared on the display. "Answer it," Valentina said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Let's hear what he has to say." Julian accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Nathan's smooth voice filled the car, carrying the false warmth of a skilled manipulator. "Julian, good. I see you made it to Oregon. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most men would have chosen their business empire over a son they've never met." "Where is Vincent?" Julian's voice was ice-cold. "Vincent is safe. He's inside the facility, working on his evening puzzle. It's a beautiful painting of the Oregon coast. I brought it for him last week. He loves landscapes. Did you know that? Particularly seascapes. He says the repetitive patterns of the waves help calm his mind." The casual intimacy of Nathan's knowledge about Vincent made Valentina's skin crawl. This man had spent months building a relationship with her brother, not out of genuine care, but as a weapon to use against her family. "What do you want, Nathan?" Christina asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Hello, Christina. I wondered if you'd come along. This must be awkward for you, learning that your husband has been keeping such significant secrets." "My marriage is none of your concern," Christina replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Nathan's laugh was warm, intimate. "Isn't it? After all, we've been planning its dissolution for 2 years. Though I have to admit, discovering that Julian had a secret daughter and son certainly adds some interesting complications to our divorce settlement negotiations." Julian's hands clenched into fists. "You used my wife's feelings for you to get information about my business practices. You manipulated Kaani's obsession with me to turn my own daughter into a weapon against me. And now you're using an innocent, vulnerable man as leverage. What kind of lawyer are you?" "The successful kind," Nathan said without hesitation. "The kind who recognizes an opportunity when he sees one. Did you know that Vincent has never had a visitor aside from me? In 3 years at this facility, not one person came to see him except for mandated welfare checks. He was so grateful for any human connection that he trusted me completely within a month." Valentina made a sound of pure anguish. While she'd been living her life, going to school, building a career, her twin brother had been completely alone, so starved for human connection that he'd bonded with the first person to show him consistent attention. "I brought him books about the law," Nathan continued conversationally. "He's quite intelligent, you know. High-functioning autism, but with a remarkable memory for detail and an innate sense of justice. He's been helping me research some of my cases, actually. He finds patterns in evidence that I miss. You've been using him for your legal work? Noah asked, horror evident in his voice. I've been giving him purpose, a sense of value. Do you have any idea what that means to someone who spent his entire life being shuffled from one temporary placement to another? The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that Valentina could see how Vincent would have been completely taken in. Nathan wasn't just using her brother. He was probably the closest thing to family Vincent had ever known. Here's what's going to happen, Nathan continued, his voice losing its false warmth. Julian, you're going to sign over 50% of your business holdings to Kaani Jackson as compensation for abandoning her sister and denying your children their birthright. Christina, you're going to file for divorce and accept a settlement that leaves you comfortable but not wealthy. And Valentina, you're going to destroy every piece of evidence you've gathered about Julian's business practices. And if we refuse? Julian asked, though he already knew the answer. Then Vincent and I disappear. I have contacts in several countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. Vincent trusts me completely. If I tell him we're going on an extended vacation to see some beautiful coastlines, he'll pack his bags happily. The car fell silent except for the sound of their breathing and the distant hum of traffic. Through the facility's windows, they could see Vincent still working on his puzzle, completely unaware that his life was being negotiated outside. You're asking us to choose between justice and family, Valentina said finally. I'm asking you to choose between money and family, Nathan corrected. Julian's crimes aren't going to disappear just because you don't report them. The environmental damage is already done. The pension funds are already compromised. The workers in Myanmar are already dead. All you're choosing is whether Julian faces consequences for his actions. The words hit Julian like physical blows because they were true. Whatever he chose, whatever deal they made, the damage he'd done in building his empire couldn't be undone. Give me 5 minutes, Julian said suddenly. 5 minutes to think about your proposal. Julian, you don't have... Nathan began. 5 minutes, or I walk into that building right now and tell Vincent exactly who I am and why I'm here. There was a pause. Then Nathan's voice came back, colder now. 5 minutes. But don't try anything heroic, Julian. I have friends in the Salem Police Department. One call from me, and Vincent will be relocated to a secure facility where none of you will ever find him. Julian ended the call and turned to face the 3 people whose lives would be forever changed by whatever decision they made in the next few minutes. I need to tell you all something, he said quietly. Something I should have admitted years ago. Christina, Noah, and Valentina waited, tension thick in the small space of the car. Nathan is right about my business practices. Most of what Valentina discovered is true. I've cut corners, buried reports, bribed officials. I told myself it was just business, that everyone did it, that the ends justified the means. Julian's voice cracked. But people died because of my choices. Workers in overseas factories, environmental activists who got too close to the truth. I built my empire on their graves. Noah stared at his father with growing horror. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe I deserve to lose everything. Maybe this is justice catching up with me finally. Valentina reached forward and grabbed Julian's shoulder. No. You don't get to martyr yourself now. Those crimes are in the past. Vincent is here right now, and he needs us to fight for him. But if we give Nathan what he wants, Christina said slowly, if we let Julian's crimes go unpunished, then we become complicit in them, Noah finished, understanding the impossible choice they faced. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Vincent through the window. He'd finished his puzzle and was showing it proudly to a staff member, his face bright with accomplishment. He looked so innocent, so trusting, completely unaware that his entire world was about to change again. There's a third option, Valentina said suddenly, her voice gaining strength as an idea formed. We don't choose between justice and family. We choose both. The others looked at her expectantly. Nathan expects us to be divided, to fight amongst ourselves while he holds all the power. But what if we don't play his game? What if we walk into that building together, tell Vincent the truth about who we are, and let him choose for himself? Valentina, he's autistic, Christina said gently. Processing sudden change is difficult for him. Nathan said himself that Vincent trusts him completely. Then we earn that trust, Valentina said firmly. Vincent is 26 years old. He's intelligent, capable, and he deserves to know he has a family who wants him. We tell him the truth about Nathan, about Kaani, about all of us. And then we let him decide if he wants to take the risk of trusting us. Julian looked at his daughter with something approaching admiration. And the evidence about my business practices? Gets turned over to the authorities exactly as planned, Valentina said without hesitation. You face the consequences of your choices, and the people you've wronged get justice. But we do it as a family together. Outside, Nathan was pacing near the building's entrance, checking his watch. Their 5 minutes were almost up. Are we all in agreement? Julian asked, looking at each of them in turn. One by one, they nodded. Christina reached over and took Julian's hand. Together, she said simply. As they stepped out of the car and walked toward the building where Vincent waited, none of them knew if they were walking toward redemption or disaster. But for the first time in 26 years, they were walking toward it as a family. Sometimes the biggest risk is trusting in love when you've been surrounded by lies. The automatic doors of Sunrise Community Home slid open with a soft whisper, revealing a warmly lit lobby decorated with handmade Christmas ornaments and the gentle sounds of residents enjoying their holiday evening. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked up from her desk with surprise. I'm sorry, but visiting hours ended at 6, she said apologetically. Unless this is an emergency? It is, Julian said simply, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built empires and now, he hoped, could rebuild families. My name is Julian Moore. I'm here to see Vincent Jackson. I'm his father. The receptionist's eyebrows rose in surprise. In 3 years, Vincent had never had a family visitor. She reached for her phone, but before she could dial, Nathan Kent appeared from around the corner, his face a mask of controlled fury. Julian, I thought we had an agreement. We did, Julian replied calmly. 5 minutes to consider your proposal. I've considered it. The answer is no. Nathan's polished composure cracked slightly. Then you're condemning your son to a life of uncertainty and upheaval. Vincent is comfortable here. He has routine, structure, people who care about him. He has one person who's been manipulating him for 6 months, Valentina said, stepping forward. Her heart was pounding, but her voice remained steady. My brother deserves to know the truth about who you are and why you've been visiting him. Your brother, Nathan said with a bitter laugh, doesn't even know you exist. Do you really think you can walk in here after 26 years and become more important to him than the one person who's shown him consistent care? The words hit their mark, and Valentina felt doubt creep into her chest. But before she could respond, a quiet voice spoke from behind Nathan. Mr. Nathan? What's happening? Who are these people? Vincent Jackson stood in the doorway leading to the common area, his dark eyes moving curiously between the group of strangers and the man he'd come to trust. Up close, the resemblance between him and Valentina was unmistakable. The same high cheekbones, the same stubborn chin, the same way of tilting their heads when confused. Valentina's breath caught in her throat. This was her twin, her other half, the person she'd mourned for 26 years. He was taller than she'd expected, wearing a simple blue sweater and dark jeans, his hair neatly combed. There was something gentle in his expression, but also intelligent and observant. Vincent, Nathan said, his voice immediately shifting to the warm, protective tone he'd used to build their relationship. These people were just leaving. Why don't you go back to your puzzle? I'll be right there. But Vincent's eyes had found Valentina's face, and something flickered there. Recognition, maybe, or just curiosity about why this stranger was staring at him with tears in her eyes. You look like me, Vincent said suddenly, his voice soft but clear. People always said I had a distinctive face, that I looked like someone specific. Do I look like you? Valentina's careful composure finally shattered completely. "You look like our mother," she whispered. Her name was Scarlett Jackson, and she loved us both more than life itself. Nathan stepped between them quickly. "Vincent, this woman is confused. You don't have any family. Remember what we talked about. Sometimes people will try to take advantage of your kindness." But Vincent wasn't looking at Nathan anymore. His eyes were fixed on Valentina's face with the intense focus that came naturally to him, processing details and patterns that others might miss. "Your birthday," he said suddenly. "When is your birthday?" "December 15th, 1991, Valentina replied without hesitation. Vincent's eyes widened. "That's my birthday too. December 15th, 1991, at 11:47 p.m. at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles." "You were born first," Valentina said, her voice thick with emotion. "At 11:43 p.m. I came 4 minutes later." The lobby fell silent except for the distant sound of Christmas music playing in the common area. Vincent stared at Valentina with growing wonder, his mind processing the impossible possibility that he wasn't alone in the world after all. "Twins," he said softly. "We're twins." Nathan's face had gone pale. The careful manipulation he'd built over months was crumbling in minutes, destroyed by simple biological truth that couldn't be argued away. "Vincent, listen to me," Nathan said urgently. "These people want something from you. They're going to make promises they can't keep, then disappear when things get difficult." "Like you did?" Julian asked quietly, stepping forward. "Like you're planning to do if Vincent doesn't serve your purposes anymore?" Vincent looked between the adults, confusion and something like fear flickering across his features. Sudden changes, unexpected confrontations, these were exactly the kinds of situations that overwhelmed him most. Valentina saw the signs of his growing distress and felt her heart break. "Vincent," she said gently, approaching slowly with her hands visible, the way the group home staff had probably taught visitors to interact with him. "I know this is a lot to process all at once. I know Mr. Nathan has been kind to you, and I know you trust him." Vincent nodded, his breathing becoming slightly rapid. "But I want you to know that you have choices," Valentina continued. "You always have choices. You can ask us to leave right now, and we will. You can take time to think about what we've told you. You can ask the staff here to help you verify that what we're saying is true." "How would I verify it?" Vincent asked, his voice small but curious. Christina stepped forward, pulling out her phone. "Birth records, DNA tests, medical records from when you were born. All of it can be proven scientifically." Vincent's face brightened slightly. He liked facts, evidence, things that could be proven objectively. "That would be good. I like proof." Nathan made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Vincent, if you go with these people, if you leave your routine here, you might not be able to come back. This is your home, your safe place." "But is it my choice?" Vincent asked, his voice gaining strength. "Or is it your choice for me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Nathan's smooth manipulation finally met an obstacle it couldn't overcome: Vincent's fundamental need for autonomy and self-determination. "It's your choice," Julian said firmly. "Whatever you decide, it's your choice. We're not here to force anything. We're here because we want to know you, and we want you to know that you have a family who's been looking for you." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from face to face, processing everything he'd heard. Finally, he looked directly at Valentina. "What happened to our mother?" Valentina felt Julian's hand squeeze her shoulder supportively. "She died a week after we were born. There were complications from the delivery. But she loved us, Vincent. She wore this bracelet every day while she was pregnant with us." She showed him the engraved cuff bracelet, and Vincent leaned forward to read the Roman numerals. "June 15th, 1991, he said after a moment. 6 months before we were born. "The day our parents fell in love," Julian said softly. "The day I gave that bracelet to your mother and promised I'd never leave her." Vincent looked up at Julian with sharp intelligence. "But you did leave her." Julian didn't flinch from the accusation. I did. I was young and scared, and I made the worst decision of my life. I've regretted it every day since. Are you going to leave us again? The simple question, asked with such quiet vulnerability, broke something in Julian's chest. Never, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I lost 26 years with both of you. I'm not losing another day. Vincent nodded slowly, then turned to the receptionist who had been watching the entire scene with wide eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez, could you help me understand what would happen if I wanted to spend time with these people? What are my options? Mrs. Rodriguez, clearly touched by the reunion she was witnessing, smiled gently. Well, Vincent, you're an adult. You can have visitors anytime you want. You can go on day trips or longer visits. You can even choose to live elsewhere if you want to, though we'd want to make sure any transition was gradual and well supported. What about Mr. Nathan? Vincent asked, looking at the man who had been his only connection to the outside world. Would I still be able to see him? Nathan's face had hardened into a mask of defeat and anger. I don't think that would be appropriate anymore, Vincent. Why not? Vincent's directness cut through all pretense. Did you lie to me about caring about me? The question hung in the air, and Nathan found himself faced with a moment of genuine choice. He could continue the manipulation, try to salvage his scheme, or he could give this innocent man the one gift he'd never had, honesty. I did care about you, Nathan said finally, his voice quiet. That was never a lie. But I also used our friendship for reasons that had nothing to do with you, and that was wrong. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for being honest. I appreciate honesty. Over the next hour, the staff at Sunrise Community Home facilitated what was probably the most unusual family reunion in their facility's history. Vincent asked detailed questions about DNA testing, legal relationships, and what expectations his newfound family might have of him. He wanted to know about their jobs, their homes, their daily routines. But mostly, he wanted to know about Scarlett Jackson, the mother he'd never known but whose love had somehow survived in the silver bracelet that now rested on his palm. As Christmas night deepened into December 26th, Vincent made his choice. He wanted to meet his family, to learn about the life he might have had, to see if the connection he felt with Valentina was real or imagined. But I want to take it slowly, he said firmly. I want to visit first, then maybe longer visits, then we can see. That's perfect, Valentina said, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her twin brother, alive, intelligent, cautious but hopeful. We have all the time in the world. 3 months later, Julian Moore stood in a federal courthouse in Los Angeles, pleading guilty to multiple charges related to environmental violations and pension fund irregularities. The evidence Valentina had gathered ensured that justice was served for the workers who had died and the families who had been cheated. The Moore family empire was dissolved, its assets used to compensate victims and fund environmental cleanup efforts. Julian faced 5 years in federal prison, but he faced it knowing that his children, all 3 of them, would be waiting when he got out. Nathan Kent's law license was revoked, and he faced his own criminal charges for conspiracy and manipulation of a vulnerable adult. Christina filed for divorce but chose to stay close to the family during Julian's incarceration, finding purpose in helping Vincent adjust to his new life. Vincent moved into a supported living apartment just 10 minutes from Noah's house. He took classes at the local community college, discovered a talent for environmental law research, and slowly, carefully, built relationships with the siblings he'd never known he had. And Valentina Jackson finally understood what her mother's love had really meant. Not the burning desire for revenge that had consumed her, but the quiet, patient work of building connections, healing wounds, and choosing love over anger, day after day after day. On the first anniversary of their reunion, Vincent gave Valentina a gift, a framed photo of all 4 siblings together, with a simple inscription: Family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing each other, every day. The engraved cuff bracelet had done its work. 26 years after Scarlett Jackson's death, her love had finally brought her children home. Love doesn't always look like what we expect, but it's always worth fighting for. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting revenge, it's getting family. What's your definition of family? Share this story with someone who's part of your chosen family, And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love, loss, and the power of second chances. 2 years later, Vincent Jackson smoothed the tablecloth one more time, checking that the 4 place settings were perfectly aligned. 2 years of living independently had taught him that some routines brought comfort, while others could be gently adjusted for special occasions. Today was special. It was his and Valentina's 28th birthday, and for the second year in a row, they were celebrating it together. The apartment was small but bright, filled with Vincent's landscape paintings and the law books that had become his passion. Through the window, he could see Noah's car pulling into the visitor parking space, right on time as always. A soft knock interrupted his preparations. "Come in," he called, knowing it was Valentina. She was the only one who knocked exactly 3 times, a pattern he'd noticed and appreciated. "Happy birthday, brother," Valentina said, entering with a grocery bag and that smile that still amazed him, the one that looked exactly like his own when he caught his reflection laughing. "Happy birthday, sister," Vincent replied, the words still feeling wonderfully strange after 2 years of practice. They moved around the small kitchen in comfortable synchronization, Valentina handling the final dinner preparations while Vincent arranged the birthday cake he'd made himself, a skill learned in his cooking class at the community college. "Any word from Dad today?" Valentina asked, stirring the pasta sauce. Vincent nodded toward the refrigerator, where Julian's latest letter was displayed alongside a dozen others. He wrote that the law library at Lompoc has gotten some new environmental law texts. He's been helping other inmates understand their cases. Julian's letters arrived every Tuesday without fail, chronicling his journey through federal prison with the same methodical determination he'd once applied to building his business empire. Year 3 of his 5-year sentence, and he'd become something of a jailhouse lawyer, using his business acumen to help fellow inmates navigate the legal system. The door opened again. Noah never knocked, a habit that had initially troubled Vincent but which he'd grown to appreciate as a sign of family intimacy. "Birthday people," Noah announced, carrying a bouquet of flowers and a wrapped gift. At 27, he'd grown into the environmental law practice he'd always wanted, specializing in corporate accountability cases. Working to undo some of the damage his father's generation had caused seemed to give him purpose. "Is Christina coming?" Valentina asked, accepting Noah's hug. "She's running late. Meeting with her lawyer about the Kaani situation." Vincent looked up sharply. Even after 2 years, mentions of Kaani Jackson still triggered complex emotions. Gratitude for the woman who'd raised his sister, anger at the lies she'd built their lives upon, and something like pity for how completely her obsessions had destroyed her. "What's the latest?" Vincent asked, his voice carefully neutral. Noah's expression grew somber. "The federal case is moving forward. Conspiracy charges, fraud, manipulation of a vulnerable adult. Her lawyer is pushing for a plea deal, but the prosecutor wants jail time." "How long?" Valentina asked quietly. 18 months to 3 years, depending on cooperation." They fell into contemplative silence. Kaani Jackson sat in federal detention awaiting trial, her elaborate revenge scheme having collapsed into a criminal conspiracy charge. The woman who'd raised Valentina with genuine love had also systematically destroyed multiple lives in service of an obsession that had consumed her for 26 years. "I still don't understand how she thought it would end," Vincent said, his analytical mind still puzzling over the illogic of the plan. Even if she'd succeeded in destroying Julian's marriage and business, did she really believe he would turn to her? "Love makes people do illogical things," Valentina said softly. Or what she thought was love. The door opened one more time, and Christina Moore entered with her characteristic efficiency, carrying takeout containers and looking every inch the successful businesswoman she'd become. Post-divorce, she'd used her settlement and business connections to start a victims' advocacy nonprofit, focusing on families affected by corporate environmental crimes. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing Vincent's cheek, a gesture that had taken months for him to become comfortable with. The meeting with the Myanmar families ran long. "We're finally making progress on the compensation fund." This was perhaps the most surprising development of the past 2 years. Christina Moore, once focused solely on protecting her family's wealth, had become Julian's fiercest advocate for making amends. The compensation fund for victims of Moore Industries' environmental violations was her project, funded by the liquidation of Julian's business empire. "How many families now?" Noah asked, helping his mother unpack the food. 47 families receiving ongoing medical care and financial support, Christina replied with satisfaction. And the water purification systems are finally operational in 3 villages. As they settled around Vincent's small dining table, Valentina marveled at how different this scene was from the Christmas Eve confrontation that had brought them together. The anger that had consumed her for 26 years had transformed into something more productive. A determination to ensure that corporate crimes like Julian's faced real consequences, but also that families torn apart by those crimes could heal. "Vincent, tell them about your internship news," Valentina said, smiling at her brother. Vincent's face lit up with the quiet pride he'd learned to express over the past 2 years. "The Environmental Defense Fund offered me a summer internship. I'll be researching corporate environmental violations for their legal team." "That's incredible," Noah said, raising his water glass. "Dad is going to be so proud." "He already knows," Vincent said, touching Julian's latest letter. "I wrote to him immediately. He said that seeing his son help hold corporations accountable for environmental crimes was the best birthday gift he could imagine." They toasted Vincent's success, but also the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A family forged not by blood alone, but by the conscious choice to love each other despite lies, betrayals, and decades of separation. "There's something else," Christina said as they began eating. "Nathan Kent's parole hearing is next month." The mood around the table shifted slightly. Nathan had served 18 months for his role in the conspiracy, but his case had been complicated by Vincent's unexpected testimony on his behalf. "I still think you were right to speak for him," Valentina said, reading Vincent's expression. "Despite everything he did, he was the first person to show you kindness. That mattered." Vincent nodded slowly. "He did genuinely care about me, even if his motives were wrong. People are complicated." "Any word on what he plans to do when he gets out?" Noah asked. "Teaching," Christina replied. "He's been accepted to teach business law at a community college in Oregon. Ironically, not far from where Vincent used to live. Will you stay in contact with him?" Valentina asked her brother gently. Vincent considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "I think so. Supervised visits. Maybe occasional letters. He was part of my life during a difficult time, and I don't think pretending that didn't happen serves anyone." This was Vincent's gift, the ability to hold multiple truths simultaneously. Nathan had manipulated him, but had also genuinely cared for him. Kaani had lied about everything, but had also raised Valentina with real love. Julian had abandoned his children, but was now working tirelessly to make amends. "Speaking of complicated people," Noah said, glancing at Valentina, "I have news too." They all looked at him expectantly. "I've been offered a position with the UN Environmental Crime Unit, based in Geneva. 6-month rotations investigating corporate environmental violations worldwide." Valentina felt her heart skip. Over the past 2 years, she and Noah had carefully rebuilt their relationship from siblings to friends to something deeper and more complicated. The romantic feelings had never fully disappeared, despite the circumstances of how they'd met. "That's an incredible opportunity," she said, meaning it despite the selfish part of her that wanted him to stay in Los Angeles. "It is," Noah agreed, "but I'm not sure I want to leave. My family is here now. All of my family." The emphasis on all wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Christina smiled knowingly. Vincent looked intrigued by the interpersonal dynamics he was still learning to navigate, and Valentina felt her cheeks warm. "Noah," she said carefully, "we've talked about this. What happened between us was built on deception. Starting over as siblings has been good for both of us." "Has it?" Noah asked directly. "Because I don't feel like your brother, Valentina. I feel like someone who fell in love with you before I knew we were related, and who's never stopped loving you, even after learning the truth." Vincent looked between them with growing understanding. "You're not actually related by blood," he said matter-of-factly. "You share a father but different mothers. From a biological perspective, there's no barrier to a romantic relationship." Christina nearly choked on her wine. "Vincent, what?" Vincent asked, genuinely confused. I've been researching family dynamics and genetics. Half-siblings can legally marry in most states, though it's culturally uncommon. If they have genuine feelings for each other, and if those feelings developed independently of their family relationship, there's no logical reason they couldn't pursue them. The table fell silent as everyone processed Vincent's typically direct analysis of the situation. "Vincent's right," Noah said quietly. "We fell in love before we knew we were related. Those feelings didn't disappear just because we learned we share a father." Valentina stared at her plate, emotions warring in her chest. "It's not about biology, Noah. It's about trust. I lied to you for 6 months. I used your feelings as a weapon against your father. How do you get past that?" "The same way Dad is getting past 26 years of guilt," Noah said simply. "By choosing to forgive and move forward. By recognizing that people can change, grow, become better than their worst mistakes." Christina reached across the table and took Valentina's hand. "Honey, you've spent 2 years punishing yourself for choices you made when you were consumed by anger and pain. Maybe it's time to forgive yourself and see what's possible." Valentina looked around the table at these people who had become her family despite everything. Christina, who had sabotaged her life but was now funding victim compensation. Noah, who had every right to hate her but chose love instead. Vincent, who approached every relationship with fresh eyes and radical honesty. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "What if I hurt you again? What if I'm not capable of the kind of love that builds instead of destroys?" "What if you are?" Vincent asked simply. "What if the love that made you fight so hard for justice, even misguided justice, is the same love that could build something beautiful?" Noah stood and walked around the table, kneeling beside Valentina's chair. "I don't need guarantees. I just need you to be willing to try. We can take it slow, build something real this time. No lies, no manipulation, no hidden agendas. Just 2 people who care about each other, learning how to be together honestly." Valentina looked into Noah's eyes, the same gray as Julian's, but warmer, more hopeful. "What about Geneva?" "Geneva will always be there," Noah said. "Family is harder to find." As Valentina leaned forward to kiss the man she'd first met as a target but had grown to love as himself, Vincent began clearing the dinner plates with characteristic efficiency. "Should I give you privacy for this?" he asked practically. "Never," Valentina said, pulling back from Noah but keeping hold of his hand. "We're family. We don't hide from each other anymore." Later that evening, after Noah and Christina had left, Valentina and Vincent sat on his small balcony, watching the Los Angeles skyline twinkle in the distance. It was their tradition, birthday talks under the stars, making up for 26 years of missed conversations. "Do you think Dad will be okay in prison?" Vincent asked, his voice thoughtful in the darkness. "I think Dad is exactly where he needs to be," Valentina said. "Learning what it means to face consequences, to make amends, to find purpose beyond building wealth." "And Aunt Kaani? Do you think she'll be okay?" This was harder. Valentina had visited Kaani twice in federal detention, conversations that had been painful but necessary. The woman who had raised her was slowly coming to terms with how completely her obsession with Julian had distorted her judgment. "I think Aunt Kaani is learning that love and possession aren't the same thing," Valentina said finally. "It's a hard lesson, but maybe not too late for her to learn it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 people who had spent their lives feeling incomplete finally understanding why. The missing piece hadn't been revenge or justice or even love, it had been each other. "Valentina," Vincent said eventually. "Yeah. I'm glad Mom gave you that bracelet. I'm glad you wore it that night. I'm glad everything happened exactly the way it did." Valentina touched the silver cuff on her wrist, Scarlett Jackson's final gift to her children, a love strong enough to survive 26 years and bring a fractured family back together. "Me too, Vincent. Me too." In the distance, a plane lifted off from LAX, carrying passengers to new destinations and fresh starts. But for the first time in their lives, Valentina and Vincent Jackson were exactly where they belonged. Together at home, surrounded by the complicated, imperfect, beautiful family they had chosen and fought for and built with their own hands. The engraved cuff bracelet had kept its promise after all. Love, real love, had found a way.